welcome to the Faith Space Podcast. I am your host, Kate Newell, along with
other host, Reverend Dylan Doyle Burke.
And we are the co-founders of the Faith Space, which is a diverse group of interfaith leaders committed to reclaiming our calling and reviving our connection to one another and the divine. We are an intentional community dedicated to sparking creative and comprehensive solutions to the structural uncertainty of the world. So, we are so happy you're joining us for our second podcast ever. And we are joined by a special guest, Pempa Dolma. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for this opportunity and invite.
Pempa is one of the co-founders of Innovative Yogis. And Dylan and I have worked for a while with you guys and just really love what you're doing. Want to share a little bit about what Innovative Yogis is with the world?
Innovative Yogis is a response to a call that we heard that demanded that we're in a massive transformational time and a phase, and it required all the solutions that are available for us. And then from the innovative side of it, the advancement of technology, a lot of liberation and progressive movements, but in the process sometimes we lose our values and morality and ethics and the thread, the heart of it. And so that's where the principle of yogis come from, that it actually contains us, keeps us centered while innovating creative solutions for the challenges that are so uniquely our time's challenge.
And are you running Innovative Yogis alone?
No, I run it with my dear husband, Brett Engel. He's a co-founder, conspirator in this.
And we will have Brett on a little bit later in the program today. But for right now, we're here with Pempa, and we're actually in Brett and Pempa's home right now.
Which is their faith space. That's what makes us different and unique too. When we interview folks, we love to ask, where is your faith space? It could be anywhere, and so you chose your home, and I really love that. Tell us why.
Because it's a time of it's hard to get into the faith space, because a lot of the faith spaces have been tainted, and then not just because of that, but personally for myself, I was born in Tibet, brought up in India. My collective faith space, the temples that are not here, there are not many Buddhist temples here. And even if there are, it's a little bit far. And so this is kind of like bringing the faith space in wherever you're at, basically.
What do you mean by other faith spaces have been tainted?
In terms of how... in the recent times, especially, this has been happening for a long time, but it's been exposed more and more in how the faith space becomes a trauma place because of exploitations and, that kind of stuff.
How did you experience that growing up, in India and being a Tibetan refugee now in the U.S.?
This is just my story, right? It's not, it's just uniquely mine, not comparable to other Tibetans. But I always grew up suspicious of rituals and suspicious of, kind of spaces, because there's such a hierarchy. And within myself, I feel like they shouldn't have all these hierarchies. And then the respect and the honor that was demanded from the traditions was like, I felt like unearned of a sort. And so I was always like a little bit wary of, suspicious of just giving my power away to that. And then I've also heard a lot of anecdotal stories about the abuses that has happened in these faith spaces. And I've also seen how faith spaces, our monasteries and all, a lot of them are funded with others' generosity, but then there was exploitation of those donations too, and become very like materialist in that sense. And so it became much more relevant for myself that this faith, the devotion to the truth and all of it is a very internal job. Spaces helps a lot, supports a lot, but that's not the answer. It really is a journey. It's an inward journey, and wherever we go, that we can create that space.
And you've created that here in your home. Could you tell us a little bit about your home, about your faith space, and what makes it that sanctuary for you, especially for those folks who aren't watching the video podcast? But can you just describe a little bit of your home for us right now?
Yeah, it's so ironic that I had such as misgivings and like trust issues with the faith space. Yet when you look at this place, you see a lot of Thangka paintings, the Tibetan Thangka paintings. There's Buddha, faces and Bayan faces, and on my altar there's a photo of Siddhartha Buddha, and then His Holiness the Dalai Lama's picture. And the rest, like a lot of things that came in here, I didn't buy them. People gave them to me. The only things are the pictures that I've taken. That's it. Like these are all gifted from people, and even the statues in there. And the Dalai Lama picture, I don't know where I found it. It was in one of my packs, and then when I saw it, it was like a rekindling of that. He's my root teacher, and his life exemplifies the sacrifices, the compassion practice, the wisdom practices and stuff. And I grew up in the boarding school that he and his sisters founded since I was 4.5 years old until I was 18 years old. And so I have the food that I have digested in all those time was as a result of the work he has done in the world. The donations that he had received went into the formation of these bodies. And so it feels very connected in that sense. Like he's like a father and kind of a spiritual father.
So the faith spaces you've often been are Buddhist.
Yes.
Have you done anything in other different religions or interspiritual spaces?
It's only been like Hinduism, Sikhism. I'm married to, his mom is Christian. And so when we go for Christmas, I do the Christmas Eve, the singings and, Jesus story and everything. And I read quite a bit about, other traditions, and always felt like, it's just truth in different manifestations. And
I'm curious about your time growing up in India, because at least when I visited, it's always been, right? The history is such an interfaith space, sometimes in really beautiful ways and sometimes in really violent ways and otherwise. And I'm wondering what it was like for you at that time, having come from Tibet to grow up more in India.
Yeah, I love India. It's like I don't know how to express India in words. It's like so many people have a love and hate relationship with it. Yeah. But India is truly a secular country for me. After having traveled around the world, the openness to all the religion, yes, and there's a lot more like a fundamentalist religions coming out, like it's happening all over the world. I see that. But in general, there's people really don't care about, the differences. They much more go to the essence, love, and trust in something bigger than this small self, like in the goodness, and that's permeates everywhere. It's alive. Yeah. And so I didn't feel a sense of alienation on that ground at all, that I actually feel here. There's a lot more churches than all the other traditional faith spaces. Yeah.
What was that like coming to this country, to the U.S., as a Tibetan woman?
It was very lonely and not feeling like there is any space for us. And even if the Buddhist temples were here, and they're all run not by Tibetans, they're all yes, we have Sakyongmepam and the Shambhala tradition of it, but that's another. There's a whole another podcast on that. But I never really felt home in those spaces, even if they're Buddhist spaces. But when I go around, there's always like a churches, few blocks, and I don't see that in like a mosque or a Hindu temple or whatever, or a Tibetan monastery or stuff like that. That's what I notice, and then I do feel that loneliness from that place.
So that's what you feel here in your faith space
Yeah.
at home that you don't get in other spaces in this country specifically.
Yeah, like I come from a collective place. You imagine Buddha temple in Kathmandu, right? You have a whole stupa, and every whole day you'll see people circumambulating, prostrating, putting the butter lamps, giving, practicing generosity. And it's a life, it's like it really permeates everywhere. And here, this is my faith space, and this is where I feel at home. But when I go outside, it just really feels sterile, and it doesn't feel like there's it's just it's a spiritual bubble of a sort. It's not protected by that.
And there's a hidden member of the household and family that we will not be interviewing today because they are how old?
Almost 9 months.
Almost 9 months old. It's
Yeah.
Jem, Brett, and Pempa's child. And I'm curious in hearing your experience of your faith space here and then raising a child in your faith space and then also in this culture, what that is like for you.
Yeah. So we named him Dorji Jem Khandro, and Dorji means the indestructible nature, and the Christ consciousness, the Buddha nature, and all of that, the spirit. And then Khandro is the sky dancer, the movement aspect of it. So one's like indestructible stillness, and the other is the movement component of that indestructibility. And that's his spiritual name. Usually in my tradition, we ask names to be given by our teachers, but I don't have them available here. So I had to kind of come up with that, and then it just came basically as like a protective name. It's a spiritual name, so that when he goes through a really hard time, walking in this confusing world, is to like that he was worthy from the beginning. He was conceived with intention. It was not an accident, and there was this protection. And then Jem came as a result of Gifford, Engel, Martinez, which are from Brett's family side. And they brought him up, and he is the Jem's father, and it just Gifford, Engel, Martinez, Jem. And so it was very like dance of those two together.
I haven't heard that story before. I wasn't sure if it was a gemstone or anything like that, but that lineage that comes through there, it's pretty incredible.
And this child of yours is so amazing. I think his eyes are really like this portal, the gateway to the world I hope that we want to create together. Thank you so much for sharing him in the faith space with us as well. I think that's been so powerful, how to incorporate family. I think that leads us more to our leadership questions too, of how we're going to ask your husband this too, so don't think that we're only asking the women, how do you balance family and professional life? But really, how do you do it? How, especially because you're rooted in your spiritual practice and you're a mother in America. What does that mean for your leadership style and how you exist in more public spaces?
Such a fascinating question. First, thank you for creating this space that allows us to bring our kid. It's a privilege. We recognize that we are like completely privileged people. And part of the privilege that I came with is I came from a collective background that hasn't been completely tainted by capitalism and individualism yet, right? Because
it's coming. You're saying that it's going to happen.
They're striving because the illusion of American dream, and it's so distant, and you idolize that, you romanticize it, and you have to get in to realize the price and the cost of that. feeding and consumerism. And so for me, I recognized right away coming here how many unnecessary things are here that are in excess on the expense of someone else in some other part of the world. So there's excess here and there's scarcity there in the material. But there is so much spirituality there, abundance of spirituality there, and there's a lot of emptiness and scarcity here. So kind of not getting like, oh, in this, like very dualistic, but kind of seeing both sides of the, coin. And so that's kind of what happened, coming here, recognizing that, capitalism is, part of the matrix, really trying to keep us from experiencing freedom and living life with joy and all. So it was a deliberate, intentional resistance to the indoctrination of our worthiness connected with success and achievement and all. So the work that we do, my husband Brett, I'm so lucky that it should be, I shouldn't be saying I'm so lucky, it should be a both partner responsibility to upbring a decent human being. But we had conversations, we had fights, we had, lots of reckonings that force us to come to this place of like, we both has to step up in whatever we can in all our ways. There's no, you're a man and I'm a woman, and so you're not, you shouldn't cook or clean or anything. So he helps with all of that. Mm-hmm. I do a lot of cleaning too, but I also help with the work, and he helps. And so it's like, but also appreciating each other's strength. Mm-hmm. Things that comes easy for him, I let him do it. Things that comes easier for me and I'm happy and joyful doing it, I do that as well. And also part of the Dharma helps is like, it really keeps me on the dot of like, it's like in the cosmic, we all just storytelling, playing in this elusive reality. And it's constant practice to stay grounded in relaxation in whatever I'm doing. And if I'm not able to do it, I know that out of my integrity and there's something going on. So I need to draw back and investigate what that is. And until my belly settles and everything is cool, and then I can go out and serve. And so in that way, it's like, I used to have so much guilt and shame because the guilt of being here with all the privileges and not serving, and the shame of the same, similar. And I had asked a lot of my those questions on, how do I reconcile all of this? And a lot of times, it's going to be a long talk, but when I ultimately asked where, I need to show up, it is to show up to take 100% responsibility for my own happiness. It's not responsibility for the rest of the world's. And it starts here, and then it extends. And I've been looking at it completely opposite. I've always looked at outside and let that enrage me. And when the rage is over, then it goes into despair and hopelessness and helplessness and complete disempowerment. And so it took me a decade to bring myself out of that shadow into understanding how this is made up, like how karma is working in this form. And so that's kind of been part of the journey.
Yeah, I can imagine some of our listeners thinking, yeah, I want to take responsibility for my life and for my happiness, but how? How am I supposed to begin that, especially when it can be so painful and the work of transformation can just be so difficult? And I'm wondering, for you, do you have any advice, I guess?
Yeah. What do you wish someone told you 10 years ago? You didn't have to go through that.
Yeah. I think the price that I was paying was too much. The price of confusion was too much. I had to renunciate it. I had, even if I'm not able to, even if the body takes decades to catch up, but at least in my imagination, in my vision, I had to give up the blaming, the shaming, the guilting, all the oppressive techniques. I had to sit and contemplate the pros and cons of holding on to my own trauma. I come from a deep trauma background of being a refugee and poor and abused and all of that. And it was being acted out to the person that I'm in love with. And I want to have a good relationship. And this person I know definitely loves me, and I love him as well. But yet the traumas would come, and both traumas would fight, and then it was a choice between, drama or, kind of surrender, kind of accepting the reality. And whenever I resisted the reality and wanted him to change so I never had to be traumatized, it made me even more disappointed, enraged, and disempowered. And I had to really look inward and take responsibility for my own part, yet hold him accountable. And that's when I learned about the boundaries. It was really palpable. You could energetically feel those happen. And so the advice would be to really look at the pros and cons of holding on to what you're holding on to, the addictions, the blames, and all of this. And the cost and the sacrifice is love, is relationship, is the future of humanity, is the abundance, it's the joy, it's the creativity, it's liberation, it's freedom. The price is so too much. And I was like, no, it's okay to go through the pain of the initial initiation. There's going to be an initiation pain of deconditioning and renunciating the habitual conditions that we have gone through that keeps us in bondage. And that initial, there's a little bit pain, but that pain is actually really comparably nothing to the lifelong struggle of seeking happiness and never finding it.
And the karma, I think of remaining purposely ignorant. It always finds us.
Yeah. And it's so I think as courage comes to me, that's what it is, courage. And the courage to love and trust despite of all that the reality is. And we all come with our own stories of why. And my story is we have come here to learn to love. There's no other point than that. It's like, why all the suffering? So we can see that we truly are the same thing. We're injuring ourselves. We're self-sabotaging ourselves. And even if it comes in this really gruesome, phases, we have to be able to see that, because when I'm in enrage and in complete confusion, that's me. I know that in my personal relationship, how I can get, And so everything serves as mirrors, even if it's sometimes too extreme, but it's a collective mirror. And we do have extremes, in ourselves and in others and everywhere.
I know in this conversation we've mentioned some words like dharma and karma. And for folks who may not know what those are, I'm wondering if you could say a little bit about what those mean to you in your own spiritual practice, or how they inform your faith space that we're in today.
Yeah, thank you. Dharma, I say, is like a cosmic law and order in order to have a harmonious, perfect sacred geometry that's already here. And a lot of spirituality, religion, and all of that's trying to be aligned to that, but it comes from outside saying, be good, be loving, be compassionate, be generous, be all of this. But that's how the cosmic law order is set up from inside. And so Dharma to me is that path that gets us to, that lets us to live and abide by that. It's that path. Karma is basically cause and effect. Whatever we do have cause and effect, and it's not just here, it has a ripple effects exponentially. It's like unfathomable in us. And so it's like every word, every thought, every action we do, like even the mental movements to me are karmic actions, but that are happening internally. And that's where I thrive the most, is like internally what's happening. The behaviorist is focused only on the behavior from outside, and I'm much more interested from, like, can the behavior align with the energy from inside so that it doesn't have to, from the repression, blast up and destroy everything, even though on temporary level we have restrained it with, boxes and moralities and ethics and, shaming and blaming and guilting. All that comes as a result.
Well, we love
because,
to do that,
yeah.
especially in the U.S., right? Compartmentalize
Everywhere.
That's our thing.
and label, right?
Yeah, which is wonderful because we do want clarity. We want to name, label, know all of that. But once we get fixated on it, then it brings us in this tunnel vision, and now we can't see the bigger picture. I think they're all wonderful. Like, absolutely, manifestation is full of labels, and that's the gorgeousness of it. But when we get hung up on one, and then we have to fight to keep that label now, permanent, and I think it causes like violence and all this destruction stuff.
I love your question about the cost. I love this cost-benefit analysis on a spiritual, moral, ethical level that informs our physical relationships as well as our spaces. It's just, you're such an inspiration to talk to. It's always wonderful to hear not only your personal life experiences, but your vision. And that's what we love to do with the faith space, and you embody it so wonderfully. This very like tangible micro aspect, the day-to-day ways of karma. And then you have the Dharma piece as well. Thank you for the work that you do. We are so grateful and in awe of what you bring to not only the faith space, but really the world. It makes us all better.
Thank you.
Again, we're here with Pempa of Innovative Yogis. And Pempa, if folks at home want to find out more about Innovative Yogis, where can they do that?
On www.innovativeyogis.com. And thank you so much for really, it's a precious opportunity. It's a joy and honor to collaborate with you and envision this faith space. And it's going to be amazing if you can keep up with this energy. And so thank you from the bottom of my heart for the effort and the dedication to this path.
Thank you. And thank you all for joining us. This has been Kate and
Dylan. And we will be right back with the other half of Innovative Yogis after this brief musical interlude.
welcome back to the Faith Space. This is Kate.
And Dylan.
We're your hosts, and we're back with our next guest, the second half of Innovative Yogis.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, Brett Engel. Hi, Brett.
Hello.
Brett and I go way back.
Yes.
We've known each other for nearly a decade through Peace
it's crazy.
Jam. If y'all don't know Peace Jam, Google it, because it's
Yes,
amazing.
It is. Definitely check it out.
Yeah.
Brett and I also go way back, about a month and a half now. So rich and textured history. But it's really good to have him and both halves, I guess 3/3, including Jem, which we talked about Jem a little bit in the
good.
first half.
He's
of
been
the podcast.
introduced. That's good to know.
Oh, yeah. The world needs to know.
And we got Pempa's blurb about Innovative Yogis, but we were wondering if you wanted to introduce Innovative Yogis from your perspective.
Okay. So for me, it's kind of the culmination of a journey of becoming aware of things that I wasn't aware of. And I was always very much ignorance is bliss, and I think that's a good thing. So let me maintain more ignorance, and we know each other because of Peace Jam, and I grew up in a world of Nobel Peace Prize winners and activists and students who were aspiring to be like that. And while I personally gave like not two shits about it, like I just was like, I don't care about any of this shit.
No way.
Yeah,
As a person who met you, because I wanted to be one of those people,
Yeah.
that's
Well,
pretty shocking.
It was 20 years of Peace Jam, so I'm talking about in the very beginning.
You're a little over it.
Yeah, and when I was a little kid, you know, because Peace Jam started, I was like 10. And
Can you mention a little bit about what Peace Jam is?
So Peace Jam is a nonprofit organization that brings Nobel Peace Prize winners together with youth from elementary school through college, with educational programming, with conferences, and with service projects. And so, and they also have a thing called the Billion Acts of Peace, which is kind of like the call to action from the Nobel laureates that are on the Peace Jam board. And it's about, you know, if we are going to create a world of true peace, here's kind of the 10 pillars that need to be addressed. And because peace is not just the absence of violence, peace is so much more than that. And so they've kind of called to the world to take action on these 10 areas, to do service projects, and to not wait for other people to make the change, but you make the change yourself. Take some sort of action in your life right now.
So Innovative Yogis is the way that you are taking action, right? Creating
Yes,
your
exactly.
1 billion acts of peace.
Yeah, so that was kind of how it came. You know, I finished working with Peace Jam right at the pregnancy time, and we decided, you know, we'd been kind of building this Innovative Yogis thing, and we decided once Jem was born, we wanted him to be born into a world of us like living that. And so that he grew up with that experience, you know, the way I got to grow up with this experience of Peace Jam. And then on my father's side, he was creating something called Mind and Life, which also had a really big impact on the world. That was bringing the Dalai Lama together with scientists from all around the world, Nobel Prize winning scientists with this Nobel Peace Prize winning Buddhist monk, you know. And they were these like science and faith type of dialogues going on. But with the Buddhism is kind of like this platform to bridge it, you know, and His Holiness has always been very interested in science, and so he learned a bunch of science through this experience, and scientists learned a lot of different ways of looking at reality from His Holiness, and then that affected their science. And so, like a lot of what we're actually living in right now, that's kind of this, you know, like a mainstreaming of meditation. More and more weird stuff in physics and so on. A lot of that was influenced by these meetings that His Holiness was having with these scientists. And now we're kind of shifting, we're kind of expanding our way of looking at the reality and seeing that it doesn't have to be like this one or that one, that they're actually both talking about the same thing with like different language.
And so for Innovative Yogis, do you see that as part of the mainstreaming or more of a countercultural component?
You know, for me, it's that these tools are like they're like human birthrights to all of us. We all have the birthright to be able to breathe and be present. We all have the birthright and all the potential, all the capacity and capability to be able to go on a journey of like spiritual evolution within ourselves. You know, these things are there, and there's tools to help us do it. It doesn't really matter what religion you come from. There's always a religion or a point in the religion that has this more esoteric practicing, going into solitude, learning how to like connect in with your inner world, you know, and really go into that experience deeply, and learn how this body is really just like a flesh suit that you're piloting through space right now, you know, and that it can. Just like if you want to be a good pilot, like if you know, I have a cousin who's a pilot. He flies for airlines, but he really likes to fly like the stunt planes and do all this crazy stuff. And like to be able to do all that level of flying, you need to be like really in tune with your machine, right? You have to be very connected and understand it and to feel it and to know how to really control it. And so much of our body is set to autopilot. Like it's built to just go on autopilots for us so we don't have to think about it, you know? And if we give it up all to autopilot, and autopilot has just been set by all the cultural conditioning and programming and stuff, then we're just kind of trapped into it, you know. But if you learn how to go in as a mechanic and, you know, tweak this and change that, and actually now I have the machine working the way I want it to work, then you can show up in a whole different way, and then your life can be about this whole spiritual evolution. You can be applying that in everything that you're doing. So.
I really love that. Especially, we've had many episodes on spiritual embodiment and what that means, and that's a crucial piece, I think, why so many people, especially in the U.S., love yoga. It's a great way to access it. I just have a question I'm sure many of our listeners also want to know. Is the Dalai Lama your matchmaker?
Kind of. I mean, he didn't directly influence, but it was his blessing of him being in my life that led to the opportunity to meet Pempa, for sure. And His Holiness kind of came into both of my parents' lives in different ways. But then later, when Peace Jam was started and Mind and Life was started, these things brought them, like His Holiness, into my life in like this kind of recurring way. Like I met him first when I was 4, and then I kind of saw him like every year or 2 after that, because my parents were all often organizing events with them, and so we would be at these experiences, and so I feel very, like, at the time I didn't really think anything of it. Like, I was just like, this guy's kind of like a goofy guy in robes and he seems nice, and all these adults are so impressed, but, you know, whatever.
And he is pretty goofy. He's funny.
Oh, he's a lot of fun. He's a lot of fun. And he always would get excited because it would be often Mike and I, my brother, would be the only kids in the room, full of a room of, like, really rich people, because they're all, like, the people who gave the extra money to get into, like,
the VIP
thing, you know? And there's no other little kids around, but it would be me and Mike without our parents, because, like, they gave us the tickets so that we could go in instead of them, you know? And he would be like, oh, it's you. And then he came to recognize us, and we worked with him through Peace Jam. And so it's been like a real blessing in my life, in the sense that I just got to be around that energy and to really feel it, like the power that comes from when you're able to get your machine working in a good way. Like, he meditates every day in the morning, like 3 to 5 hours, gets up super early and sits, and he's one of the most, like, active people I've ever known, like, on the planet. Like, in terms of his travel schedule, he's just going around, and what he's driven by is to be of service to as many people as possible, you know?
So that's so much of your model and an influence. I'm wondering how that shows up in Innovative Yogis. I'm wondering also, do you consider yourself Buddhist? Like, we talked to Pempa, and she's Tibetan, but did you, like, convert to Buddhism? What do you identify spiritually as, basically?
Yeah, I grew up and I always identified as a Bretonist because I believe in Brett, and I was not interested in religion at all. And my mom was Christian, so I would go to church on Easter and Christmas. And my dad was Jewish, but he didn't really practice a lot of Jewish stuff, so we would sometimes do Hanukkah. 1 or 2 times he took us to a temple. But he had converted to Buddhism before he came into my life. When I say my dad, I'm referring to my stepfather, technically. And he would often refer to himself as a Buju, you know, and that he would still do Jewish stuff, but most of his practice was around Buddhism. So I got to see him doing meditation, and he would take us to retreats as a family and things like that when we were young. But like I said, on one side, I was being exposed to, like, the yoga meditation world, and I was like, fuck this, like, you know, I'm not interested at all, this is a waste of my time, like, and then on the other side of it,
such irony.
Yeah.
And now it is your entire life.
I know, yeah. And on the other side, I got this whole activism and Nobel Peace Prize winners thing, and I was like, yeah, you guys are all just making yourself way too stressed out, you know? You know, you're just giving yourselves things to worry about, whiny liberals type of thing. And but I was like, it's so funny because I had that feeling, but then I would be forced to be at a Peace Jam for a weekend and be around all these people who I, like, thought negatively about their opinions. But then I'd be like, oh, these are really nice people, and they're really fun. And so, like, I was exposed to these things, and I saw the benefits of them. But I was just in my own jaded, hurt self and didn't want to expand yet.
So how did that transformation happen, where you go from this person who's exposed to all these people who, to some degree, you're like, oh, these are really nice people, to some degree, you're like, fuck this, to then really owning your own yoga, do you want to say yoga studio or yoga organization with your wife from Tibet, and having a house that Pempa described to us earlier with these tapestries on the wall, and spirituality seems to really be a center for you now. So how did that happen?
I think I went through a certain amount of breaking out of selfishness, because I was super selfish. Still, I like struggle with being so selfish, and it's like I have to like do an active work to like be not selfish. And then I'm like, get real tired. I'm like, oh my God, all this not being selfish has been really draining, you know? I need a couple of days of just me. And so I think that was part of what was blocking me, because I was in my selfishness and just only cared about my own suffering. And I had my reasons that felt really valid of why I should be so angry and upset and down on the world and everything like that. And so, but then in my college time, when I was studying psychology, and I was like full atheist too at this time. At my studying psychology, I was like, yeah, that just makes sense. All religious stuff is just bullshit. George Carlin's got everything right, and he's got a lot right. But I see some of the holes now, and so in this psychology setting, and then being with Pempa, and having this relationship that was my first real serious long. You know, like it felt like is going to be the rest of my life. Like I really believe that's what we're developing here. You know, so there was this new like foundation of safety and security from that. And I was going to school for the first time and actually wanting to go to school, whereas I'd always been forced to go to school. And so I was having my first experience of enjoying school. And so I just went full out into the psychology stuff, and it made me realize so many of my habits and patterns and things. And I started to see where they were coming from, and it forced me to go, okay, let me reevaluate all these things that I was exposed to, that I was saying, fuck this, fuck that. And I started to see how important the activist stuff was and this peace work was. And I started to see how important this like internal work was, and how helpful these tools of meditation and yoga and so on are. And how they're not, like meditation and yoga is like, to me, I like it because it's the most generic thing to refer to it. But it's like, you know, it's prayer, it's intention setting, it's like all these things that generally get kind of dismissed, you know, because they're not like physical, tangible things that I dismissed for sure. You know, I was like, I'm not interested.
What's the first thing to go, right?
Yeah.
When shit hits the fan, it's like, oh, the last thing I want to do is pray right now.
Yeah,
I have to like
exactly.
work extra hard.
Yeah, exactly.
So how were you able to switch that? Like, you're kind of switching your muscle in a way.
It
like,
is.
Your knee-jerk reaction had to completely change. How did it do that?
Yeah, I think part of it was that I'd always had this, and I think this is something we all have. Like in Buddhism, we talk about we all have the Buddha nature, right? That there's this, you know, luminous awareness inside of all of us, and it's, you know, universal, that we all have it, and we are all capable of being fully connected with it, right? And so my experience of that is, you know, from a kid, there was certain, you know, cultural stories and things like that that were more magical that my heart really went to, and I really believed and felt connected with, and I would have these much more spiritual, like loving God type of experience, but I didn't know what they were, you know, and but I felt that, and then as I got older, all the maps of meaning that were being created in my mind in order to fit into the society and to be accepted, and all the stuff that happens in the way that our minds get reshaped, then I started going, okay, I don't want to keep being made fun of for like believing in this, you know, spiritual type of thing. I want to fit in with these guys who are all like, let's, you know, get the girls and let's get fucking wasted and let's do the crazy stuff and let's be the coolest ones in school because we think we're just cooler than everyone else. That's why we're now cool, you know?
Because you determined it. So.
Yeah, we have decided it, and these guys are all fucking losers, you know? And so...
which is the real heart of spirituality.
Yeah.
That's where we go.
So what I often say to people that no one transforms or changes anything unless you're uncomfortable enough. You're kind of like pushed to do it. So
yes, that's
tell
exactly,
us what was so uncomfortable for you.
Yeah, for me, the discomfort came from, by seeing my patterns and habits and where they were coming from and losing excuses that I had for them. Then I was like, oh shit, like now I have to face them and feel them and own it. And like, I don't like having to own it. Like I feel, you know, it was easier when I could excuse it, you know? And then that made me start to read and look at this kind of spiritual stuff in a way that I had never looked at it before. But before the spiritual stuff, I looked at more like the conspiracy stuff because I was coming from like really mainstream atheist. And I was like, everything can be explained from like a materialist perspective. Anytime you try to explain it without that, you're just, selling out and just, or a bad writer or something like that. So I started going, okay, it seems like there's more to this world than what seems to be there, like, because just this materialist mindset is leaving me in all this suffering. But then I started thinking about aliens and space and weird science and what kind of weird stuff's going on behind the scenes that we're not paying attention to. And what I realized, like, part of it was looking into like the activist side of the world, because part of what I'd always done is dismissed a bunch of these activist people. It's just like whiny people saying that this is bad for our health, whatever. And
damn.
Yeah.
Sorry,
so to me,
activists out there.
Yeah, like first step into conspiracy was like maybe the activists are not just bullshitting, because to me they were just conspiracy in a lot of ways.
Uh-huh.
And so then I just kind of kept doing that. And since I was in school doing the university degree, and it was in psychology, it was about investigation and doing it in the scientific method and this kind of objective awareness and so on. And so I just kept applying that process and going deeper, and I started going, okay, shit's a lot weirder than I thought. And I keep running into very spiritual reference stuff as you get into the weirder stuff. And then I was like, okay, well, I'm studying psychology. Let me look at the science of meditation. Let me look at what all these mind and life scientists were saying while I was growing up. And I started looking them up and was like, oh, these guys are actually like Richie Davidson's kind of like the head of the field. I didn't realize. He was just like Richie that was there at the retreat with us, And so then I realized that there is this like strong body of research that shows that this human machine is actually built to be able to do this stuff. And it is available to all of us, and everyone benefits from practicing it and training it. And the main source of delivery for this information has been from a religious side in our past,
And that's the history of it, right? It started out as religion, and theologians were the original scientists. They were the ones asking all these questions.
Exactly.
And now we have scientists doing the work, and it may be a different way. Very similar questions.
Yeah, I find this transformation fascinating, from this almost like Richard Dawkins scorched earth atheism, right?
I was so loving
Which is
those
like
guys.
This is all just awful and wrong, and you're just thinking about God as this like magical man in the sky who's going to grant wishes, that kind of mentality, which is also something that resonates with me as before I was in ministry, when I was in high school, because that was the cool way to think about God, especially I went to a small, mostly white private school, and that I couldn't be. I went to church. I didn't tell anyone I went to church, right? And even if I went to church, I wasn't even going to a Christian church. And if I said I was Christian at all or had a Christology, I would be made fun of in the locker room or whatever. And that was just my own setting.
So you're saying that masculinity and toxic masculinity is tied to spirituality or lack thereof?
I felt that in my life for sure. Yeah, it felt like that, especially the way that the toxic masculinity has manifested in this consumerist society, where it is about trying to solve our problems with all this external stuff rather than getting the tools to kind of go into our own experience. And the religious has been the source of that, and being open in the heart and being loving and being vulnerable are like part of the religious experience. That was like the place in our society, in our culture, where that information was being taught from and being brought from. I know that all the institutions have times that have completely distorted that and done horrible things, which that's why that stuff was so convincing, because there's all this data of like crusades and shit like that, and you're like inquisitions, and you're like, what the fuck, So I can see that point, and any institution can be used very evilly, for sure.
Yes.
But the true heart of the spirituality and the connection and the love, because like it really comes down to the love thing. Like with the Buddhism thing, you get there from the interconnectedness. You're realizing that everything is interconnected, that you're not actually separate from anything. Then you start to go, wait a minute, so then what I'm doing to out there is what I'm doing to me. And then compassion becomes much more natural, because it's even technically selfish to be compassionate. So like even someone like me who's so selfish, it was easier path into compassion, because I'm like, oh, I'm not doing it for them, I'm doing it for me.
Well, that's one of the questions, because I heard you use the word spirituality and religious experience quite a few times during this conversation, and I'm wondering, what that means to you. Like, what is a spiritual experience for you? What is a religious experience? And then getting back to where we are, how does this space that you've created as your home and sanctuary, how does that feed into that spirituality and spiritual experience?
Yeah, I feel like the mystical experience is very essential to spirituality because it seems to be like universal. And there's this universality to certain things. When I first got into psychology, it was because of body language. And what you learn very quickly is that there's cultural body language and there's universal body language. And the universal body language, no matter where you are on the planet, humans will respond and their muscles will move in certain ways to express certain emotions. But the cultural stuff can be very different. Like, you know, this, like the OK symbol here can be like up yours in another country, you know? And so there's a lot of cultural truth and there's a lot of universal truth. And that's how I see religion comes out. There's a lot of like, you know, cultural story, cultural version. This is the way it is. This is, you know, our ritual and this is the ritual that's right. And, you know, that's the cultural truth. And then there's like the universal truth, which always gets back into like the love and connectedness and surrender and forgiveness and, you know, this healing process. And then the mystical experience seems to be universal as well, of this true actual experience of the oneness, of the transcendent. You know, that it's not, and that this is available to all of us. It's not just available to like this one really special guy in our religion. You know, it's not just the Dalai Lama who can get it. It's everyone has the ability to have this experience. And that scientifically we would say, well, then let's test it, right? And that's what these meditators have been doing, and what these systems and schools have done. They've tested it, and they've given the opportunity for other people to replicate their tests and try it for themselves. You know, and it's not about just believe. It's about, here, practice these techniques. Here's the parameters for how you run your experiment. Apply these things, you know, do it for this many amount of time, and then check to see the results on your brain. See what happened, you know. And now we actually have brain scans to show it. But even before brain scans, you could apply it to yourself and see. So.
Well, that's why I love what we do here at the Faith Space is interdisciplinary and interfaith, that it doesn't matter how really you come to it. I've studied a lot of science as well. I'm more of a person that started on the faith side and was like, great, now science caught up and can prove what I already knew. Yeah. And I think mystics would agree with that.
I think so.
Historically so. But I love that you're bringing that flavor, and that is a piece of your transformation. That's really the causation of it. And I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, because I was in a place where I was like, I can't abandon science. Science was like so important to me. But then when I started to see that actually there's a scientific way of understanding the spiritual experience, and that I can learn it and apply it and actually live it in my own life and become to embody these things, then it was like all the opposition just disappeared, and it was just like it all just blended into this thing that allowed me to step forward when I was like scared to step into anything spiritual before.
I am incredibly struck in this conversation about how different it is than the conversation that we had with Pempa, with some similarities, right? And both of you from these very different backgrounds, and it sounds like you from more of a skeptical scientific background, and her also from a different type of skepticism about organized religion, but that you've come together to create something. And the reason why I keep bringing up your home, besides the fact that, you know, we're filming here and hosting the podcast here today, is the fact that you also run Innovative Yogi classes here. And events. And I'm wondering if you can talk about that partnership, and then also this space that you run Innovative Yogis out of.
And the leadership piece would be great too, because you both are co-leaders in doing it.
It's true. Yeah, we've always done everything together. That was like, we met and there was just this mutual respect from the beginning. We just like saw each other's fire and badassness, and it was like, okay, all right, I see that. Yeah.
I like that word, badassness. I think we have to use that more in our branding.
And so, and then part of what like made me confident to like go for our relationship even further was that we would have times where we worked together on projects, and we would always actually have a really good time doing it, and we would co-lead it, and we would listen to each other. It's funny though, as our relationship went on later in time, and then we started to get lazy on things and such, then we started to fight when we were working. And we had to go through this whole process because all the personal relationship stuff had left certain samskaras, impressions that had created new triggers, you know, and then the work time would bring those triggers up. So then we couldn't do the work time anymore because it was always so connected with all these other personal things that we were going through. And
is that where Innovative Yogis came out of?
partially, yes, because we were going through our own changing experience, and we were like, all right, this is really tough, it's really intense, and we're doing it our way and going through our process, and we need to figure out now that we've made some progress on it, and we see that how important this is for everyone to have access to, we need to create something that makes it available for everyone. And because to us, all the big problems on our planet right now are just a crisis of consciousness. And it used to be much easier to believe that it was a crisis of lack of resources or lack of technology or but like we have the technology, we have the resources to take care of, feed everyone, to house everyone, to have such a completely different system on this planet. But we're not doing these things because of this crisis of our consciousness. And we have this crisis because we're just all these traumatized people following traumatized people. And no one is actually saying, hey, we all as a fucking planet need to take a break and do this work together and do this healing together. And then through that change, through that consciousness evolution that we all go through, because the evolution, part of it is things have to die, things have to be let go of, things have to be, surrendered. And then the new can come and the new can build. And once that happens, then all of a sudden we'll all look around and be like, oh, sweet, we have all the resources, we have everything. Very quickly we could fix so many of the problems. Mm-hmm. But if we don't fix that consciousness crisis, we'll have all these solutions sitting in front of us and we won't do anything because we'll be squabbling about all this stuff because we're all so wounded and so hurt and so not able to actually talk about the real solution because we just hear the triggers that the other people are saying.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like part of that healing process and dealing with the trauma, the collective trauma that we have for you and Pempa and Innovative Yogis begins at home and begins within your family.
Yeah, and I think we need to empower all families to be able to have that type of experience, because that's so much of where the root problems stem from. Not being able to be connected with the people that you love the most. Like having love in your life is like most essential thing. People who are loved and feel connected with their community live longer, have higher health. We studied health psychology, and health psychology was like woo-woo in the beginning, in the sense that these psychologists were walking up to doctors and saying, hey, it's not just the fatty thing that they ate that caused the heart attack, it's the stress that they're under because they're type A type people and they're really like stressed and they're like, ah. And so now we understand in so many ways that the wounds and sufferings that we're going through are all being exacerbated by stress. And we don't really have the tools of how to live a stressless life because the society is constantly encouraging us to be in these stress states. Mm-hmm. And there's a certain amount of stress. Technically, all stress is your body in a sympathetic nervous system activation, right? Which means that it's putting out the cortisol instead of giving you the ability for the digestion and blood flow. It's saying blood to the extremities, be ready to fight, be ready to take action, and it's not a bad thing. But if you're there all the time, then it drains on your system. So.
I'm so glad you mentioned the health piece. I feel like so much of what we do at the Faith Space as well is a public health organization.
Yeah.
And people often put spirituality separate from our embodiment, and you are so right, Brett, that they're all the same thing.
Yeah.
So thank you for bringing that up. Thank you for being so vulnerable and open about your family, your organization, even your past. I will tell you, it's a little tough hearing that someone who met so many Nobel Peace Prize winners still didn't get it until you did.
Yeah.
And I love that story too, though, because it takes every single language. And that's why we need an interdisciplinary and interspiritual approach to all this work. Thank you for being a part of our collective.
Yeah.
Thank you
we
for
love being part of it.
Yay! And Dylan and I just are so grateful for your support and for your engagement, really, and your leadership. You brought up so many good things today. I think we could have so many more episodes just based on this. So.
And Brett, just as a reminder, if folks wanted to find out more about your... Can I call it a ministry? Your ministry?
Yeah, sure.
Is that okay?
In a sense,
does that feel right? That's my language, not necessarily
that's
yours.
fine.
But if folks wanted to find out more about Innovative Yogis, where could they do that?
InnovativeYogis.com, and everything's there. And we're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram as well, Patreon. The main way we're really making this thing happen is we're looking for people who believe in what we're doing and who want to make it available and who want to literally vote with their dollar and just put $1 a month through Patreon and become a patron. So that's one way that we're going to make this possible, by kind of not going into the standard capitalist route, because once you start going into that path, there's so many pressures that hit you, and you're not able to be as authentic and so on. We see this thing that happens. It happens to science. It happens to all elements of our society. It happens to religion, even, And so
some prosperity gospel.
Yeah. And so, but we're living in a time where we can all microfinance each other. And we can all make a choice just through our phone to quickly say, okay, $1 a month going to go to this thing that I believe in. And so that's our hope, is that people will support us. And we are also using Patreon to support other things that we believe in as innovative yogis, that we think that are going to help shift the consciousness and help us break through this crisis. So.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I totally agree. Vote with your dollar.
Yes.
Support Innovative Yogis. Definitely support the Faith Space. You know where to find us at thefaithspace.org. Thank you so much for joining us at this podcast. I've been your host, Kate Newell, and
Dylan. We're going to have to find a better way to close off. Is there any other last words that we want to say or close out with, Kate?
I really just want to say that I'm in a space of gratitude. And so this week for our listeners, if you just want to anchor in that space and remind yourself what you're really, really grateful for. I love what you said, Brett, about love being a part of a healthy life. So find what you love, find who you love, relish it. It's a true, true blessing. I certainly love both of you.
Yes. We love you too,
We
Kate.
love you too, Kate. I think one thing that I'm taking away from this is how much of a journey spirituality has to be, almost. That there is no easy way to finding that meaning in our lives. And also the things that we might think of as objectively good can sometimes be either a turnoff or hard to access. I know I've spent a lot of time in the activist community, and I often wonder how often the language that I use is bringing people in, and how often it is actually creating a gate. And so I think one of the other invitations that we have this week is to think about how you're engaging with your spiritual journey, and thinking about how you're engaging with others along that journey.
Thank you so much for joining us. You can find out more info at thefaithspace.org. And we are grateful for you, our wider community. Wherever you are blessed and a blessing.